Perplexing, unintelligible, weird. Just like life, surrealist literature is often difficult to understand. Just when you think you're following someone's train of thought, that you've caught on to the thin thread, loosely holding the poem or story together, you're hit over the head with something so bizarre and bewildering that you need to stop reading. Maybe you decide to circle back and start rereading in an attempt to trace the thought path that got you there. Maybe, in a moment of rage, you decide to throw your book out of the window into the rain, where the water will wash away any resemblance of words on the page. And this is because if you try to read surrealist poetry with the goal of understanding or knowing exactly what is being talked about, you're missing the point of surrealism entirely. The goal of surrealism is not to say what is true or real, but to allow us to experience all the strange, wonderful things that are impossible with everyday language. In Andre Breton's Surrealist Manifesto, he makes a strong stance against this realist kind of literature which attempts to represent subject matter truthfully, avoiding speculative fiction and supernatural elements, and to represent familiar things as they are. Realist authors choose to depict everyday and banal activities and experiences. While literary realism came to prominence in the 19th century with notable authors like Fyodor Dostoevsky, who Andre Breton famously had a severe dislike for, it wasn't exactly a new school of thought. The literary realists, who focused on portraying the hard reality of the world as it is, who Breton was responding to, were already themselves responding to the Romantic period, which focused on the human spirit, emotional heights, and interiority. Of course, the Romantic period itself was a response to the Age of Reason, which again focused on the exterior world, logic, and science. Language, it seems, is always critiquing itself, trying its hardest to push itself forward, only to return to old ideas. But instead of pontificating in the abstract and spending time discussing poetry, it's hard to get away from the old bard William Shakespeare. Writing in the English Renaissance of the early modern period, it would be reductive to try and capture all of Shakespeare in one literary phrase. But if we look at his most influential poetry, his sonnets, we can see the kind of thing Breton was responding to. A Shakespearean sonnet is focused on rules and argumentation. Each line has the same number of syllables, follows a rigid rhyme scheme. About halfway through, there will be a turn called the volta before the poem resolves itself with a heroic couplet. Two lines that rhyme and provide a sense of completion. While sonnets take an incredible amount of skill and patience to write, they're also anathema to Breton's ideas of freedom and pure psychic automatism. Consider Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fairest thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. While technically brilliant, the sonnet feels more like a puzzle or a parlor trick than a poem. There's lots of pretty images and everything is in perfect order, but raw emotional experience is missing almost entirely. In order to get or understand the poem, we have to unpack it. It becomes a sort of logical processing that only allows for one real conclusion. That is, it is more focused on logic than emotional experience. If there is any emotion at all, it is not even for the beloved this poem is supposedly about, but seems more focused on the author's own pride. Even the beloved's very life, very essence, becomes secondary to the poet's own infatuation with his own writing skills. Compare this to Andre Breton's famous poem about his wife, Reunion. My love, whose hair is wood fire, her thoughts heat lightning, her waist an hourglass. My love, an otter in the tiger's jaws, her mouth a rosette bouquet of stars of the highest magnitude, her teeth footprints of white mice on white earth, her tongue smooth as amber and as glass. My love, her tongue a sacred host, stabbed through, her tongue a doll whose eyes close and open, her tongue a fantastic stone, each eyelash traced by a child's hand, her eyebrows the edge of a swallow's nest. My love, her temples slates on a greenhouse roof, and their misted panes. My love, whose shoulders are champagne, and the dolphin heads of a fountain under ice. My love, her wrists thin as a matchstick's, whose fingers are chance, the ace of hearts, whose fingers are mowed hay. My love, with marble and beechnut beneath her arms of midsummer night, a privet and the nests of angelfish, whose arms are sea foam and river locks, and the mingling of wheat and mill. My love, whose legs are fireworks, moving like clockwork and despair. My love, her calves of elder tree marrow. My love, whose feet are initial letters, are key rings and sparrows drinking. My love, her neck pearled with barley. My love, her throat of golden valley, rendezvous in the torrent's very bed, her breasts of night. My love, her breasts molehills beneath the sea, crucibles of rubies, specters, dew-sparkled rose. My love, whose belly unfurls the fan of every day, its giant claws, whose back is a bird's vertical flight, whose back is quicksilver, whose back is light. Her nape of her neck is crushed stone and damp chalk, the fall of a glass where we just drank. My love, whose hips are wherries, whose hips are chandeliers and feathers, and the stems of white peacock plumes imperceptible in their sway. My love, whose buttocks are of sandstone, a swan's back and amianthus, and of springtime. My love, whose sex is gladiolus, is placer and platypus, algae and sweets of yore, is mirror. My love, her eyes full of tears, of violet panoply and magnetic needle. My love, of savannah eyes. My love, her eyes of water to drink in prison. My love, her eyes of wood always to be chopped. Eyes of water, level earth, and air, and fire. Far from idealized and maybe sometimes a little offensive, this poem speaks more about the experience of love and all its complicated, sticky, confusing glory. Breton's love for his wife as a complicated, unique person shines through all of the bizarreness. Where Shakespeare tells us his beloved is beautiful and just expects us to believe him because look how pretty my poem is, Breton invites us to experience his beloved's beauty in all her wild splendor. This is because Breton, even with his insistence on pure psychic automatism, is here writing from the heart, whereas Shakespeare seems too wrapped up in his own head. While Breton's surrealism was highly influential, he was far from the first person to push for a more experiential, musical approach to poetry. Breton was highly influenced by a French poetry movement called Symbolism, which was heralded prominently by author Charles Baudelaire. who wrote The Flowers of Evil, who himself was in turn influenced by American romantic heavyweight and pioneer of Gothic literature Edgar Allan Poe. While it is unclear if Breton had read Poe, the lineage of his thought is certainly clear in their thoughts about literature and poetry. Poe, who is famous for his bizarre, incredibly musical, and incredibly psychological work, also regularly discussed the importance of dreams. For instance, in one of his most famous quotes, "Those who dream by day are cognizant of many things which escape. Those who dream only by night," seems as though it lives in perfect harmony with the Surrealist manifesto.
I believe in the future resolution of these two states, dream and reality, which are seemingly so contradictory, into a kind of absolute reality, a surreality, if one may so speak. It is in quest of this surreality that I am going.
Further, the two had incredibly similar ideas in terms of logic and realism in poetry, in favor of the complicated reality of our lived experience.
It is to be hoped that common sense in the time to come will prefer deciding upon a work of art rather by the impression it makes, by the effect it produces. I would define, in brief, the poetry of words as the rhythmical creation of beauty. Its sole arbiter is taste. With the intellect or with the conscience, it has only collateral relations, unless incidentally, it has no concern whatever either with duty or with truth. This poetic principle itself is, strictly and simply, the human aspiration for supernal beauty. The manifestation of the principle is always found in an elevating excitement of the soul.
It seems if we try too hard to rationalize the world or poetry, if we break it down only to its logical, rudimentary components, we are fractured with a compartmentalized view of everything. It all becomes a simple yes or no, true or false. Poetry becomes either good or bad, understood or misunderstood, a success or a failure. But I think life and poetry are simply much, much stranger than that.